views and opinions of any of the guests of After Hours AM are not necessarily the views and opinions of After Hours AM, its hosts, its staff, or any of its affiliates.
Welcome to the After Hours program.
Are you ready?
It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
Now broadcasting live from the After Hours AM studio, Joel Sturgis and Eric Olsen.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this edition of After Hours AM. I'm your host, Joel Sturgis, and I'm back at you this week after I snowed in, and right along with me,
Eric Olsen.
Hey, Eric, how you doing, man?
I am doing pretty well.
Good.
How are you?
Oh, I can't complain, that whole thing. I would cry and I would complain about the weather, but it does us no good. But I did hear something interesting before we bring Clarissa Cole on, of course, and she maybe could weigh in on this. I heard that in Ohio, people are shooting knives at each other.
Shooting knives at
Did
each
you
other.
hear that, though? Did you hear the story? You had to have, because it's in your state.
I mean, are we talking about the Columbus attack?
Yeah, we're talking about guy shows up in his car, and as horrible as that is, don't get me wrong, and runs down these people and then knifes them. But instead of saying there's a knife guy running around, they said there's a gun guy running around. So evidently they can shoot
you're right.
knives at
day,
people.
They were saying there was an active shooter.
Yeah, it's like, since when is a knife a gun?
I heard after the fact, like maybe that night, when things did get straightened out and they had all their facts straight. They said the mistake was because the police officer, the security guard, no, it's not security guard. He's OSU, Ohio State police officer. Because he showed up so quickly, he was on the scene within like a minute.
Well, he was there. He was there anyway for another matter, right, at the school, and that's why he was there. Johnny on the spot.
OSU, you're talking 60,000 students. They have their own police force.
Holy moly! I didn't realize it's that big.
Oh yeah, 60,000 students. Yeah,
man.
all the really big universities
It's its
have
own
their
city.
It is. It is literally its own city. They have their own police force. It is apart from Columbus. It is not the city of Columbus. And he was a recent graduate, actually, the officer. Anyway, he showed up very quickly, and he, let's face it, dispatched the attack.
Yeah, he did him in.
Very quickly. So that's what people confused. They didn't know if the shooting had been from the attacker or the officer or whatever. So that's where the mistake came in. He was there so quickly and dispatched the knife-wielding attacker so quickly that they did not realize that the attacker did not have a gun.
Wow, Clarissa, again, everyone, Clarissa Cole is joining us tonight. We're going to be talking about road killers tonight, but first I want her to weigh in on the hysteria of the gun, the knife-shooting gun.
That's the problem with the media right now, with, social media being so instant like it is. Nobody has to get their facts straight anymore, like before going to press or, even before going on the air. It's just such an instant thing that, that's why I think a lot of these mass murders in recent history, and this one too, the facts are wrong. The fact that, he's a terrorist.
Yeah.
No, he's not connected to any terrorist group, because people hear the first rumor and it's just out there. It's on the airwaves. And whatever happened to journalists actually checking sources? Does this not happen anymore?
That doesn't happen anymore. You're talking ancient history. Come on.
It's like they jump on the first thing and then CNN's reporting it. It's crazy.
Yeah.
I heard it on CNN, and they were talking active shooter. I heard it right away. I happened to have the TV on, and it came on, and they were all over it, and they were on top of it, and they were all worried and concerned and spouting all their platitudes already. And I thought, for sure that was the case. And at first there were something like, I think there were 5 injured. And then, of course, eventually it rose to 11, and the only fatality thus far anyway, and it looks like that will be the case, was the attacker. And no, it was not a terrorist attack per se, but it does appear he was certainly motivated by alienation.
Well, what was his descent? Not that it matters, but was he Arab? Was he Somali? What was his descent? Because I've heard conflicting.
Somali.
I was going to say, I've even heard conflicting reports on who the dude was.
He was Somali, and he was still real young. I think he was only 19, maybe. He'd only been in the country a year or two, maybe 2 years. He had not acclimated well. He said he felt he could not pray. He felt very uncomfortable praying on the OSU campus.
Well, he could have went back to Somalia. I mean, you know what I mean?
Without killing people?
Yeah,
Sure.
without killing people, realize, hey, you know what? Maybe I'm a square peg trying to get in a round hole. Maybe I should go back to where I'm comfortable and not kill anybody.
The thing is, when you are talking about a school, and it's a big city too, it's the state capital. When you're talking to schools, 60,000 people, he had plenty of access to, Islam, and he had plenty of access even to Somalis. And of course, they started interviewing people, and they said, "No, he didn't come around us. We didn't even know the guy."
Yeah, we barely even met him, but yet there he is, hitting everybody with cars.
I'm so glad you brought that up, Eric. The fact that it is its own city, and there are a lot of outlets, especially for students. Like, part of me wants to go back to college, man, because there were all these services that are offered usually free of charge, and get-togethers and all these things that are geared toward making you feel a part of the community.
Yeah, I was at a college the other day, and I was looking around thinking, you know what? I should go back to school. I'm going to become a cop. And I thought better of it.
Yeah.
After my wife informed me that, hey, you're old, and it's not like Lethal Weapon. You're not going to be like Merton Riggs, okay?
All right, check this out. My wife, who is older than you, older than both of you, though not combined.
Thank God.
That would be my parents. They're older than both of you combined. But nonetheless, she is going back to school. She works for one of the better-known private colleges right there in Cleveland.
Wow.
And she is going to avail herself of the opportunity to go back to school.
What's she going to school for?
Well, she has been... as those who listened to the show, where it was Dawn and I in the first hour, are aware, she has been energized, shall we say, by the most recent presidential election. So she now thinks she wants to go to school for political science.
Oh, well, that's a gig that pays well.
Well, it depends what you do. Like anything else, it depends what you do with it.
No, I'm joking because I remember when I was going to college, and I remember these philosophy majors and this and that, and and I remember the guidance counselor more or less telling these people it don't pay crap. What
philosophy,
really,
for example, there are very, very few spots for philosopher.
Where
the title on your desk says
philosopher. Yeah, exactly.
There are very, very few.
Yes.
And basically, it's all academia.
If
right?
my
it's
kid
all
came
be
to
in
me,
colleges.
If my kid, Eric, not to cut you off, but if my kid came to me and said, "Dad, I want to be a philosopher," I'd say, "Go to school first and become a plumber. Then go become a philosopher because you're going to need that plumbing education." Let me tell you.
Although, I mean, as a woman here, I'm going to weigh in with there is a pay gap between men and women, and the more letters you have behind your name for whatever it is gets you higher pay. So good for her.
Exactly.
Yes,
Exactly.
Well, she wants to become more educated, and she realized as she was writing. I mean, she's fired up, man. She started a new website and social media
On
tended
fire.
to it. She's on it, man. She's all over it. And
So is she going to run for political office in the end? I mean, is that really kind of the...
she already has an offer to join the staff of a regional politician.
Very cool. Very, very cool. Go, Dawn. I say
She may do
definitely
that,
follow
although
your
she's
dreams.
flipping busy, let's face it.
Well, I say follow your dreams no matter what. You know.
I have a question.
Yes.
Does that mean that she's going to have to kind of disavow herself from you, Eric? Because
Because of why now?
no, just
Yeah, why?
but no, partly because you're an on-air personality. That can be dangerous for politicians.
Oh, sure
Oh,
can.
Well, I don't know that she will actually be. She's perhaps a bit too honest and, and volatile.
Well, you know, honesty's a horrible thing.
Be a politician herself. I could certainly
Gotcha.
see her working in politics. You know, I could see her as an aide. I can see her as a advanced person. You know, researcher, blah, 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 lots of different
Hey,
things.
if she
I mean,
becomes an
really,
aide.
she's a writer. Let's face it, she's a writer. So she wants to be able to write intelligently and with full knowledge of the workings of government as a writer and as an editor. She doesn't want to make mistakes. She doesn't want to be uneducated. When I first met her, she had some significant holes in her education, and she has shored those up pretty well. But, you know, she didn't have a big background in the nuts and bolts of the working of our political system or of our government. And I just happened to have that for no particular reason other than that I was a political science major, for one thing, and, you know, have been interested in it. Remember, I'm the apolitical political science major.
Sure, that works, I guess.
So I've been following it all along, and kind of right after 9/11, when half the country was energized to get into blogging, and everyone was just so up in arms and had to have an outlet, and blogging was this new outlet that anyone could do. So I, like thousands, tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands, eventually, of others, you know, took up arms, as it were, took up a keypad and started a blog. And so that was a very heavy political period, and I was writing about it, and Dawn started her own site. She started writing about it. Eventually, we ended up combining forces. So, I mean, on and off, I've been very interested and involved, at least from an observational standpoint, in politics. And she just feels like she wants to shore up that part of her education, her knowledge, which I admire. I'm sure she'll also take writing to keep working on that and just get better and better and better. And, you know, we'll see what happens. But it's a really, really good school, and she already works there. So it will be relatively convenient. I think she's going to ease in. She's not going to jump in with both feet because she works full time. She's a mother. She's a wife, blah, blah, blah. And the school is not really near where we live. It's about a full hour away. So, but I admire her, and I am patting her. Our daughter, the 17-year-old, goes, Mom, by the time you graduate, you're going to be old. Why do you want to do that?
Wow.
Why do you want to do that? Don't you hate school? And Dawn's like, no, I love school. I loved college.
It's all in
What's
the name
wrong
of
with
self-betterment.
17-year-old daughter? What the heck is wrong with you?
Yeah, just think of all the attractive young college guys she's going to be around, huh, Eric?
Oh, yes. I am so concerned.
Heavy pause right there.
Well, anyhow.
My level of concern has risen. No, I trust her.
There is a reason why, of course, we have the beautiful and talented Clarissa Cole in the air tonight. And everybody knows Clarissa, that, you know, she is the resident forensic psychologist for After Hours AM, but we're going to be covering something kind of really kind of came up this afternoon, and I was thinking about road killers. Since I saw that documentary series that we were watching, the Killing Season, I was thinking, you know,
amazing stuff.
Yeah, road killers, you know, they're more prevalent, and so Clarissa and I were talking, and man, you really brought something up, and I wasn't even familiar with this killer. So, Clarissa, why don't you tell everyone who you were profiling this week?
Before you do that, let me interrupt 1 second. Sorry. We're not talking about skunks and raccoons or
No,
even
we're
deer.
talking about serial killers that use the highway. Basically their crime scene.
Not wanton slayers
No.
of forest folk.
No forest folk. Not like a wrong
I
turn
would be upset
situation.
about that too, though, because I love animals.
Well,
so.
that is true. I've hit a deer or two.
I'm glad we cleared that up.
Yes,
exactly.
No, road kill. Yes. Well, you know what? This was actually really hard to research, Joel, because a lot of the. I mean, this is the creepy part. A lot of these serial killers, right, that use the main interstates, have not been caught yet.
Really? They're still out there running around?
Yeah, lots of them.
Wow. So taking the interstate could actually be more dangerous than taking the back roads.
Oh, totally, because it's an easy getaway. It's, you go to state, and I would love to say that law enforcement between the states talks to each other, but law enforcement from different counties doesn't talk to each other. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
so when you travel state to state, you're really evading.
Well, that's something that was brought up at the last show we did about serial killers, and we had Josh Zielman on, and he had, of course, I'm sure you've seen the show, on A&E, which is the killing season. And that was something that they had brought up, that these law enforcement agencies don't even talk to each other, period, hardly.
Not at all. I mean, there is just no people, like you see shows on television, like drama shows that are not real life, that, they put somebody's fingerprint into a database and all of a sudden all the cops are on top of him. I'm like, that's not how, even if they identified the guy, the cops are like, wait, who's going to respond? Whose county is he in? I mean, it's ridiculous.
Well, true. Yeah, it's so convoluted.
Yes, it is. And there really isn't a good national database. The FBI is really the only agency that, is nationwide, and people aren't reporting things to the FBI if they don't know they're a serial killer.
Really? Okay. Well, tell us about Randall Brent Woodfield.
Yes, Randall Brent Woodfield is now known as the I-5 killer, which I-5 is not very far from my house. I've traveled it many times when I used to live up in Shasta. It's a big arterial highway right through California, and it goes up through Oregon and Washington. So think of the entire western seaboard, if you will, has I-5. It's not like the 101 that's on the coast, but it's right through the center of everything.
Man, so it runs the entire state.
It runs all the way from California, from the bottom of California, all the way up through Washington. So it's that main drag through the center of everything. And like I said, since it's not a scenic drive like the 101.
Yeah.
It's where all the long haul truckers. It's just a business road. I-5.
Okay.
So Randall Woodfield was born kind of in the middle of it in Salem, Oregon. And the thing that gets me about him is that he was having trouble from the time he was a teenager. Okay, so he was actually arrested in, the early, like the mid 60s for indecent exposure already.
Wow. So he would already had a checkered past.
Oh, yeah. I mean, he was already having a problem. The problem with indecent exposure and peeping is that nobody takes it seriously.
Not now they do, but back then they didn't.
Well, and even now, a lot of people get slaps on the wrist. And when he was in the early 70s, I guess, he got a slap on the wrist. And his football coaches tried to kind of suppress this information because they wanted to keep him on the team. Because apparently Woodfield was a pretty talented football player.
Okay. So he's in school and he's, looking in on a neighbor or two and exposing himself
from time to time, and getting caught for it too. So God knows how many times he's done it.
Getting caught red-handed, so to speak. And,
God!
And then the football
Willie Flasher.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. He's showing his wiener everywhere. The coaches.
Well, he gets caught. They must have been reporting him.
Yeah, they catch wind of it. The coaches, and they're like, you gotta put that weenie away. You don't put that weenie away, we can't have you here anymore. Kind of thing going on.
Shoot up and get on the field.
Yeah. Shut up and carry a ball instead of your balls.
Yes, exactly. Keep
that cup on.
Yeah, keep that cup on this time.
So in 1974, he was so good at football that he was actually drafted by the Green Bay Packers.
Oh, why does that not surprise me? That the Green Bay Packers, home of the serial killers, Wisconsin. Hey, we like serial killers. Why don't you come on over? We're going to sign you to a contract Just keep the sausage in your pants, okay?
Oh God. Well, you know what? So that's the rumor, right? So supposedly it's because he didn't make the cut in training camp, that he wasn't actually on the Green Bay Packers team.
Oh, he didn't.
He was drafted
he
and
never...
he signed a contract, but it was actually, rumor has it, because he flashed so often while he was in Wisconsin during that time that the Green Bay Packers are like, hey, if you can't keep it in your pants, forget it.
Even the Packers didn't want him around.
It's terrifying. I know.
Wow.
Packers?
Yeah,
In
even the Packers.
Wisconsin?
Yes.
You're killing me. You're killing me.
I can't believe we
They
are
turned
talking
away
about...
a future serial killer who was flashing his willy left and right.
Yeah, I mean, they could have said, hey, look, we could have had a new Ed Gein in our hands.
Oh my God. We won the last game. We had a 4-game losing streak. I'm already on the ground and you're kicking me. It's killing me.
Well, it is what it is. But it is the land of sausage and cheese.
And you know what else? It was that 70s show.
It was, too.
Oh my God. It's totally true. Yes.
He kind of resembles Pez.
I am blaming the Packers kind of because they did not take him on the team, and that is where all hell broke loose.
Oh, really? So he was a scorned draftee, so from the Packers. Packers, it gets there and they say, well, yeah, you got to stop picking, places to show your weenie off. And so they got rid of him, right? Packers got rid of him.
They did. They cut him at the last possible minute. Too.
Oh, that'd make me mad too.
And he had a contract and everything. That's kind of rare. So they cut him.
He must have flashed the wrong person.
Or the wrong dozen people.
Yeah, a dozen or a group. You know what I mean?
He flashed the wrong mob.
He might have showed up in the locker room and said, "Hey guys, look at this," and they're all naked anyway. So
Good point. He may have. So he was cut in 1974, and then in early 1975, there was a string of women. So he's from Oregon, right? So that's where he returned.
Well, he's not from Wisconsin. Just stressing that to everyone that's listening. I'm giving you guys a reprieve here. This one is not from Wisconsin. One of the very few serial killers that is not hailing from Wisconsin.
We know you're going to assume that he was from Wisconsin.
We knew you were going to
assume.
assume.
You would be wrong.
Yeah, this time you're wrong. Normally you'd be right. But this go around, nope, not the sausage and cheese state this go around.
Not this time. He went back to Portland, Oregon. And it seems like, and this is what's weird about him, is that it wasn't just that he was one of these freeway serial killers. He really went on a spree.
Just one of them. There's a whole group, like a union.
There is like a group. So in 75, he started off just wielding a knife and approaching women and robbing them of all their belongings, but he would sexually assault them before he robbed them.
Oh, so the robbery was just so he can get some money so he can go to Denny's. But really, it was all about the sexual assault.
Well, he was killing two birds with one stone.
Well, that is true. Well,
there's so many innuendos that could go there, but I'm gonna.
They say one bird in the hand.
I shied away from it.
One bird in the hand is worth two in the bush.
Oh God. So he assaulted all these women, but they were, other than being assaulted, which is terrible enough, they were left unharmed. He left them all alive. And so this is happening in 1975, starting, beginning of that year.
Yeah.
But he assaulted a lot of women, and he didn't really try to disguise his identity at all. So by April of that year, he'd been caught because enough people saw him.
Well, sure.
Like, hey,
I mean,
I recognize the guy.
He was only all over the TV for getting cut by the Packers.
You know what? That's true, actually. I mean, I'm sure people had seen his face. He was he was a star football player in high school in Oregon. So I don't know what he was thinking.
Everybody, he should have went, to California and did it.
Well, that's coming. But he got caught up in April. But part of the reason that they caught him was not that they recognized him right off the bat. It's that they actually sent, and you know what? I can't believe they did this, by the way. They sent undercover female officers out there to entrap him.
Wow.
That would suck.
That would suck. It'd be bad to be the bait.
Yeah, you're a female officer. Do you want to go out there and carry a purse and walk through the cold, lonely streets of Portland and wait for a guy to try to rob you? Thanks.
You're a female gender and you're semi-attractive. Would you like to be bait?
Unreal. But apparently he got caught up in one of these stings, and he was caught with someone that he robbed. He was caught with the marked money that he got from one of the undercover officers.
Wow,
that he robbed.
they really went all out to catch this guy.
Well, I guess there was a lot of terror in 1975 because there were so many that occurred back to back that women were afraid to go out on the street. They felt they had to. They caught him up, and he pled guilty, to reduce charges. He did not plead to the sexual assault, just a second-degree robbery.
Okay.
But he was given 10 years in prison. That's a pretty good
That is
sentence.
that's a life-changing sentence.
You'd think so.
You think you'd learn after that.
He was put on parole less than 4 years later.
Oh, wow. They didn't keep him around very long.
No, and he'd had no treatment at all for
Yeah.
any of his issues.
Was it because of overcrowding in the prison system or something?
I'm guessing. And back in the 70s, they did not have treatment for this stuff in the prison system at all.
Yeah. Well, do they now? I mean, a lot? Or has it come a long way? Or is it still lacking?
It's come a long way. It really has. But do they need more? For sure.
Okay. Just kind of
No doubt
curious
about it.
because I just seen a documentary about our prison system and how some of the plans of some politicians to lock everyone up that's illegal would bloat it would just decimate our criminal system that we're already overcrowded. It would add millions more to it. And I was curious of whether overcrowding has played a part in a lot of these monsters getting out a lot earlier than they should have.
It has, because of the fact that they try to pass legislation all at once that is sort of a fail-safe for this overcrowding. So, for instance, there have been measures out here where they say, hey, let's parole these guys that are locked up on drug offenses. Like their most recent offense is a drug offense.
Yeah.
If it's a drug offense where they ostensibly haven't hurt anybody, let's get rid of all these guys in the prison system, cut down on overcrowding. And so everybody votes for that.
Yeah.
They go, woo, that sounds great. And they vote yes on that
why
measure.
not? Yeah.
But what the legislators haven't told the public is that the guys that get lengthy sentences for drug possession, drugs for sale, the reason that they get lengthy sentences are because they have violent offenses in their past.
I've seen Breaking Bad.
Yeah.
So, yeah. No, I hear you.
They have rape, they have assault and battery, they have, attempted murder, and they were given short sentences then. So then the next time they get caught up by police for possession, they give them a 12-year sentence. But it doesn't mean that they're not violent. People that are nonviolent and just have drug offenses typically don't receive prison time at all.
They don't look at the giant picture, do they, when they're talking about
they're looking
these?
at just the last offense on the rap sheet, not the whole thing.
Okay.
Clarissa, I have a question, I would like your thoughts. It's a double-edged sword. As I understand it, the leading assumption, the theory of why violent crime, and this is looking at the big picture. I know we've had a kind of a big spike here just in the last year or two, but the big picture over the last 3, 4, or 5 decades is violent crime has come down very steadily. And the leading reason for that, I've heard, is the fact that we have just locked so many people up, including people who are ostensibly just drug offenders, because drug offenders do tend to, more than the general population, commit other crimes. So on the one hand, that's good. Violent crime has been reduced over the decades, but the other side of the coin is we now have this enormous, unbelievably huge, and not just in absolute terms, but in relative terms, we have the largest prison population in the world. So what are your thoughts? What is the answer?
The answer, pure and simple, and this is partly why I went into my job, is rehabilitation. The model that I look at is the Canadian system, and they are really kind of excellent at it. It's not that they actually lock up less people per capita. It's that they don't keep them because they engage very heavily in rehabilitation from the get-go.
Gotcha. Well, that makes sense. I mean, you have to rehabilitate. Otherwise, no matter how long you've locked them up, they're going to reoffend.
Of course, and they're actually learning to become more criminally sophisticated.
That's the only lifestyle they know. We got to run a break, and when we come back, we're going to talk more about the road killer. That's right. You're not going to want to miss this because it gets really weird before we get done. And we're not going to make fun of the Packers anymore. All right? So don't worry.
Or
that's
even
done.
Wisconsin.
Or even Wisconsin. Okay, I can't promise anything, but I'm going to do my best not to make fun of Wisconsin. Be right back right after this.
Anavar Media LCC is a dedicated team of professionals committed to helping business development scale and protect their websites, mobile applications, enterprise software solutions in the Northeast Ohio area. Locally owned since 2012, our client-centered values truly sets Anavar apart. Contact us today to learn how you can get 25% off your first project. Call them at 234-380-4852. Again, that's 234-380-4852, or visit them at www.anavar.com. Again, that's www.anavar.com.
It's Thursday night, and you're grabbing drinks with some friends. Started off with a pitcher for the table, which quickly becomes two. There's pool. And there's the photo booth.
All right, everybody squeeze in. Say cheese!
Followed naturally by an order of wings. And another.
Can we get some extra ranch sauce?
Then there's the ceremonial nightcap.
So what are we doing this weekend?
And lastly, it's back to the car, which, if you're buzzed, could be the most expensive night of your life. Getting pulled over for buzz driving could cost you around $10,000 in fines, legal fees, and increased insurance rates. Nothing kills a buzz like getting pulled over for buzz driving, because buzz driving is drunk driving. Brought to you by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and the Ad Council.
It's your ideas, work, and creativity that make it your yard. At ACE, we're here to help with hoses and sprinklers to nurture growth, gardening tools for the shape of good things to come, even the right fertilizer and bug killers to make the grass a little greener. You'll find it all now at ACE, your place, with everything you need for your yard, plus helpful advice, almost like we're right there. ACE,
the helpful place.
Do you have a question for our guest tonight? Don't feel like calling the show? Not a problem. Email those questions to afterhoursam@gmail.com. Again, that's afterhoursam@gmail.com.
And now, the final crowning touch to this cake. Take a bite.
Chocolate.
And welcome back to After Hours AM, everybody. I'm your host, Joel Sturgis. Right along with me,
Eric Olsen.
is the beautiful and talented Eric Olsen, and the equally... No, I'm kidding. Eric Olsen, and of course, we have Clarissa Cole on the show tonight. We are talking about one of the strangest serial killers I've heard of in a long time, Randy Woodfield. But Randy Woodfield, just to catch everyone up that might be just tuning in, was actually an NFL hopeful gone awry. Had it not been his penchant for showing his weenie off, he just might have made it into the big leagues. But because of his vice for showing himself off and peeping at women, he lost his chance to be an NFL star. But now that brings us to post-NFL. What did he do after he got cut from the Packers?
Well, he had assaulted a bunch of women and robbed them, and he got locked up. The sentence was 10 years, but he was freed in less than 4 to get out for parole. So in 1980, he set out again, but he was determined not to get caught this time. So after he raped Sherry Ayers, which was a former classmate of his, he knew her, he murdered her by bludgeoning her and stabbing her in the neck.
Oh, my God.
And after only a month, he then murdered a couple. Darcy Fix and Doug Altick were shot dead in their apartment, and their .32 caliber revolver was missing. Up until then, he'd only used a knife in his crimes.
And now he's got a gun.
Exactly. So, he's escalating big time.
Randall's
by January,
got a gun.
Yeah, he's holding up gas stations up and down the I-5. And by the way, he's not just holding up gas stations. He's molesting women and sexually assaulting them and holding them up.
So he just can't. He doesn't know what to do. Do I hold him up? Do I molest him? I just don't know what to do, so I'll just do both. The guy sounds like, okay, so he's running up and down the highway, the interstate, which is primarily, like you had said, a working interstate. It's not really like a scenic route or anything. It's for commerce. And
definitely,
you know,
it's not well traveled by tourists.
Yeah. So it's like truck drivers, stuff like that. So he's running up and down I-5, stopping here and there and everywhere, and showing his willy off and putting guns in people's faces. But then he starts murder, and that's a far cry from showing your ding dong off to murder. You know, what I mean, how do we go from that? I suppose, like you'd said, he didn't want to get caught again. So I suppose the best way to not get caught is to eliminate the witness.
Exactly. And actually, it's not, if people, like I said, people underestimate it. They think that, peeping or exposing, indecent exposure, is a far cry from rape, but it actually isn't. It is the precursor to rape. Almost every rapist I've ever met or talked to, and by the way, that's a lot, they all started peeping and exposing themselves.
What's the average age of these peepers? When do they start? When does it seem like
young? On
average, would you say 12, 14?
I was going to say 11, 12, right as the hormones are kicking in. Okay. They're interested in, their age-appropriate peers, like girls in school, but they're also peeping on adult neighbors. They might start exposing themselves by the time they're a teenager, and then it's just not satisfying enough anymore, so that's when they escalate.
Got you. Yeah.
So take it seriously.
Yeah, definitely.
So Woodfield is doing this, but he's still in Oregon, right? That's where he was born, and that's where he's doing his crimes. And he molests 2 young girls. He sexually abuses 2 women and shoots one of them, named Sherry Hall, to death. He shoots Beth Wilmot, but she was just wounded. She survived. But by the time he moves into February of 1981, so we go from January to February, he's down in Redding, California all of a sudden.
Wow.
And he murders Donna Eckerd, who is 37, and her 14-year-old daughter after sexually assaulting both of them in Redding, California.
Man, he is just a killing machine.
Oh, God. And then he goes and he he drives up to Wairika. That is how it's pronounced, by the way, Wairika, California. And he abducts, rapes, and sodomizes a female store clerk. And then he drives up to Ashland, Oregon, and does the exact same crime in Ashland.
So he
to
was
a different store clerk.
He was active almost 2 years, wasn't he? 79 to 81.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
In February of 81, he went up to Washington State, and he's doing crimes that are mostly robbery and sexual assaults in Vancouver, Olympia, and Bellevue. And then in February of that year, he shot and killed Julie Reitz in Beaverton, Oregon. So he's going up and down that corridor from California up to Washington, doing sexual assaults and robberies and some murders the entire way. So, officials aren't linking this because different communities aren't talking to each other.
Exact. Again, here we come back to law enforcement not necessarily having an open door policy when it comes to talking, conversing about what's going on in their own communities.
Would this be any different at all if it were now?
Gosh, I wish I could say yes. Unless they referred this case to the FBI, which, by the way, I think they would. I think several of the police departments would have referred to the FBI rather quickly, especially the abduction, rape ones, the kidnapping. I think they would have, and then it would have been linked together. But
yeah,
there's a possibility that no. And here's what I'm thinking is the only reason that Woodfield did get caught in 81 is because he left so many victims alive. If he had killed all of them and there were no witnesses, I don't know if this ever would have been linked together.
Well, let's just say, for argument's sake, an individual kills somebody in, let's say Vermont, and he drives to Ohio and dumps the body. How hard or how likely is he to get caught once he's crossed all the state lines and dumped the body?
Well, if the person is not known to them, is a total stranger to the killer, extremely unlikely.
Because I've heard about that. I've heard people of some affluence going to small, ghettos basically and thrill killing. And then just leaving.
It happens all the time. I mean, you hear about those people that are homeless getting beat up. This is just a step further than that. And yes, it does happen quite a bit. And people don't think it happens. But if you travel and you pick a victim that is unknown to you and can't be, because that's the biggest link that law enforcement uses is how is the victim connected to the killer? If you're not, what do you do?
Well, yeah, I mean, especially... if you leave a fingerprint but you've never been arrested or fingerprinted for anything, they're really not really worth anything, the fingerprints, right?
Well, exactly. And the fingerprints need to be in the national database.
Exactly. So, and not many make it into the national database.
No, they don't.
Large.
It depends on the jobs you work. Like mine's in the national database because the job I do.
Yeah.
But
I think
most people are not.
Locksmiths might be in the national. I'm not sure, but it just seems weird to Eric and I both when we've talked about this on other shows that these organizations, these law enforcement organizations, don't have an open door policy to talk to each other about these crimes and work together. Maybe have one database.
That would make so much more sense. And like certain states also don't do DNA as a matter of course. It's it's individual by state. So a lot of states do not do DNA upon conviction. California is one of the states that does. If you're convicted for a felony count in California and you do time in prison, your DNA is getting taken, whether you like it or not.
Why do they do that? Why do they take the DNA?
So that they can link them to other crimes. And that has happened a lot where a guy will get locked up for a minor offense.
Okay.
Maybe he'll have 2 years. They do his DNA, and then they find out that he murdered someone.
Makes perfect sense.
Because his DNA's on file.
Our state also does that over here.
Good.
They do that. I've seen it in the newspaper. Even for DUIs, people get felony DUIs, and one of the conditions of sentencing is they must submit DNA.
I just read really long but absolutely fascinating. I think it was in the New Republic, which doesn't usually do really long non-political things, but it was over about a 10-year period that this writer was in touch with this man who was found by a dumpster in, I believe it was North Carolina, and no memory. He had no memory of his identity. And he was naked and absolutely had no clue. On the other hand, he had really good memories of things not personal. He could recall what had happened, politically and nationally and whatnot. And he was obviously very intelligent. He was very well read, but he had no idea who he was. And so he is not identified, no matter how hard people have tried. And the writer is just astonished that over this whole time period and with all the advances and the NSA and everyone, being surveilled everywhere. Finally, at the very end of the story, he is identified basically through just really legwork, genealogy legwork. And they finally, after all that time, track him down. But it took 10 years. And the conclusion was, if you live on the fringes of society, if there are certain behaviors that most of us take for granted that you do not engage in, you can still be utterly anonymous in America, even to this day. And there are thousands of people who die unidentified every single year.
Oh, I'm sure of it. I'm really sure of that. A lot of people, like you said, live alternate lifestyles from you and I. Maybe they're never a registered voter. Maybe they didn't have this, or maybe they've never partaken in that. So really, there's no record other than maybe their social security number, provided you could find it, that they even existed.
That's exactly right. And this guy, he'd been a restaurant worker. It's a very convoluted story. As it turned out, he'd really actually probably had 3 identities. And finally, at the end, he circled back around to attempting to become his original self. So, Clarissa, you would find this case, I'm telling you.
It's interesting. Already I'm kind of questioning it. It's called a dissociative fugue state.
Okay.
Exactly. Perfect.
I know nothing.
Right.
I know nothing about the case, but I know that is what it would be called. It would be a dissociative fugue state.
That's exactly what it was. I learned a lot about it. Boy, I'll tell you. Like I said, it was very long and detailed. But the bottom line is exactly what you were saying, Joel. If you don't participate, if you don't have a job, he was in the restaurant business, so he was off the books.
Yeah.
He never got a check. He was paid in cash.
Yeah.
His entire life. He never owned a house. He never signed a lease. He never did any of the things that quote unquote normal people do. So he just didn't associate with people. He was not a people person. He was an absolute
kind of a drifter.
loner.
What we call a drifter today, maybe to some extent.
He was a drifter. Yes, he was a drifter. But he wasn't, a malcontent, and he didn't commit crimes and whatnot.
He was just...
He lived on the fringes of society for a variety of reasons. He had a very difficult upbringing. That was part of what, they're assuming caused the fugue episode, or what turned out to be apparently 2 different ones. But nonetheless, my point is even in this day and age, with all the concern, rightfully so, about our surveillance society and the fact that everything we do is observed and we got cameras everywhere and so on and so forth. Your own computer is keeping an eye on you.
Sure. Well, if you got a smartphone, they know exactly where you are.
That's another thing. Never had a phone. That was another thing. Never had a smartphone. If you avoid these things, you can still be utterly anonymous, even in America in 2016.
Man, that's a great idea. That'd be awesome just to be able to walk away from everything. I mean, how many times do you hear those stories of people that are so stressed, things are going so wrong in their life that they just disassociate themselves from who they are and walk away?
That's
just
exactly
walk
what
away.
This guy had done. That's what this guy
pick
had
up
done.
and leave.
At 16, originally. He had left home at 16. So my point is, to circle back around to what Clarissa's talking about, if you pick and choose your victims properly, you may never get caught because no one knows who they are. And frankly, no one cares.
Yeah. Well, and that's, I want to circle back around to that quickly, Eric, because it is important. And I know that this is where I want people to kind of lift that veil of not ignorance, but of denial about the thought that anybody could be a victim, no matter how well protected you are. Like even if you carry a gun, you have a conceal and carry, you're trained in martial arts, there could be somebody that just bests you at the wrong time. And I feel like to kind of counteract that, it is important to tell people where you're going, to tell people about identifying marks that you have, like tattoos. I know that seems weird. I know that seems morbid, but it's important because if something happens to you, the worst thing in the world is for your family not to know what has happened and for them not to be able to identify. And so I know, like I said, I know it seems morbid and nobody wants to think about that eventuality, but I always tell people, tell your family what tattoos or identifying marks you have. Tell people where you're going, what you're doing, who you're going to be with, who you hang out with.
Yeah.
Because those are always the usual suspects.
And I don't care how well you are in martial arts or how many guns you're carrying. Yeah. If someone gets a drop on you and jumps you, you don't stand a chance generally.
Exactly. And that's what people are looking for, that weakness. And the worst fear that I would have just as a friend, as a family member, is that something would happen to my family member and then they would be discovered, but nobody would know how to identify them. So it's one of those things that I do think about doing what I do, is that people know me. They know what to look for.
Well, in conclusion of the story, how did Randy or Randall Woodfield get caught, and what were his convictions, and how many years is he serving currently, if he is still alive? What's going on with him?
He is still alive. So in 1981, so he'd been on a spree there that seemed to be like escalating for a couple of years. But since he had so many living victims, they really did start to zero in on him. And they knew that it was going to be in the Oregon area because most of the crimes happened in Oregon, even though he went to California and Washington. Yeah. So enough people had kind of made a tentative identification that they did a search of his apartment. They found matching things like knives and tape, and they did show his, they took a mugshot, they showed his picture to the living victims, and they immediately identified him. So by March 16th of 1981, he was indicted for murder, rape, sodomy, attempted kidnapping, armed robbery, and illegal possession of firearms.
Wow. Damn.
Yeah.
That's a laundry list.
In Salem, he went to trial for murder, attempted murder, and 2 counts of sodomy. The reason that they didn't charge him with everything is because that was what they felt that they could prove right then and there. And he was convicted on all counts in June of 1981 and sentenced to life in prison plus 90 years.
Life in prison plus 90 years.
Just in case.
So why didn't they just put the guy to death?
I don't know if they have the death penalty in Oregon. I'm not sure.
I mean, you get someone like that, and, there should be like a federal death penalty. And if somebody gets that much time, they can just off them. You know what I'm saying? You see what I'm saying?
And what he did too with if he was trying to be like a really wily serial killer, he kind of did a good job because he picked people from age 8 up to age like 60.
Well, so he had no pattern. He had no pattern then. No MO. Okay. The reason why I say the death penalty is because some of these people, like a serial killer like him, and I'm sure Eric, you'd agree with me, because I'm really not I'm not pro death penalty, but some of these people just cannot be saved.
Oh, I mean, of course, I agree, obviously. And the more times we have spoken with Clarissa, the more I feel that way. Although I also very much admire, as we've discussed many times, her empathy and the fact that I think she
really a great guy.
Tries. She tries with every single one of these people, and she holds out, hope anyway that they can.
Need I bring up the Ed Gein case? He was really a nice guy until he snapped. I really understand where he's coming from.
He was sick. I can't help myself. I mean, it's not that I don't feel bad for the victims, but when someone has something like schizophrenia, I know how that affects people.
What's Woodfield's illness? I mean, you got to have mental illness to run around and do the things he did.
Well, I think he was probably a psychopath, and he was a sexual sadist. So in Woodfield, do I feel sorry for him? Absolutely not. I don't think that what he got was enough. I think the death penalty probably would have been appropriate.
Yeah.
He was not sick. He was criminal.
Well, yes.
Allow me to state my view, because that's what I do. I state my view on the death penalty. I have no doubt that there is a subsection, the worst of the worst of the worst, who there is no hope. They will not be rehabilitated if by some miracle, like escape, for example, which is, I guess, always at least a remote possibility, that they would do it again, kill again. They would be a danger to society. So what do I think should happen to those people? Well, the logical, the efficient answer is that those people, that specific subset, should be executed. My problem is with that, number one, I don't want even one innocent person to be put to death by what amounts to myself, my government representing me. I don't want to kill anyone who's innocent. And as we found, now that DNA has become so much more prevalent and available and accurate, that their mistakes are made. Let's face it, mistakes are made.
You never hear about them, though. You never hear about their mistakes.
Which mistakes?
When they put the wrong guy to death. Yeah, you never hear them say, "Oh, our bad, the state." You never hear that.
No, you're right. So that's number one. Number two, from a purely philosophical standpoint, we were mentioning philosophy earlier. I was also a philosophy major. I don't know if I've mentioned that. From a philosophical standpoint, I don't want my government setting the example of putting people to death because it is so permanent. Because I don't want to encourage that. Yeah. I don't want to encourage that behavior. And like you said, man, you can't take it back. So on the one hand, totally get it. I have no sympathy for these awful, dangerous, murderous people. I have none. I don't care what you do to them on a personal level. But from a governmental and from a cultural and a societal standpoint, I, A, don't want to kill any innocents. B, don't want my government to take on the role of being a killer.
Well, okay. Let me give you a little bit of a rebuttal. It comes down to dollar and cents.
Please do. Go right ahead.
Okay, it comes down to dollar and cents, taxpayer dollars. Okay, you get this guy, girl, whoever. You have them dead to rights, so to speak. They did it. All right, they admitting they did it. People saw them do it. Hell, there's even video footage of them doing it. Why not kill them and be done with it? Because quite honestly, it saves us a lot of money. 75 grand a year is a lot of money to house one prisoner.
And the very first thing that I said was, there's no question, it's the most efficient.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
I do not deny that. And I do not deny that. I do not deny the objective side of it. This is really much more of a subjective thing, although it is objective, like I said, to execute someone who is innocent, because you can't take it back. And I don't want that to happen. That's like the worst thing the government can do, is to kill someone, the maximum penalty for someone who does not deserve it. And I don't want that blood on my hands, frankly, or on the nation's conscience. Do I agree?
I agree with that, but I feel like I have to interject, Eric.
Please do.
I think that happens, at least in the state of California. Do I think that happens and has historically happened on a regular basis? I absolutely do not. Speaking as somebody that worked on death row for a number of years, even if it was the most recent crime that they were saying they didn't do, were they guilty of other crimes that were just as heinous most of the time? Unfortunately, yes. And that's where I have a problem. I mean, I see all of these that are, publicized as, oh my gosh, he's an innocent man and he was on death row. Does it happen occasionally? Yes. Do I think it happens on any sort of statistical basis that is significant? I don't. I think it's extremely rare.
I believe you. And hopefully, and I'm assuming, going forward, it will become less and less and less so. But will we ever get to a point where it never happens? I don't know.
But generally, Eric, they die of old age before they meet the gas chamber anyway.
It's true. And if there's any possibility of I don't necessarily mean rehabilitation, but you see, I don't know where the listening audience is heaviest, Joel. So I apologize for this, but I am a Midwesterner at heart. Okay. And being a Midwesterner to me means that it's based on hard work. And if you believe in something enough and you work hard enough and you are sorry enough for what you have done, does it make up for it? No. But does it get you somewhere? I think that you have to strive for that. I've just always felt that way, that putting you to death doesn't get you off the hook. You got to work harder.
Yeah. No, I agree.
And it's too easy. Putting somebody to death to me is too easy. You need to atone for what you've done in a meaningful way. And that's part of the reason that I went into what I did.
But how many actually atone for what they've done, Clarissa? Really atone? Or how many are just saying the game, just saying it to get easier time?
I'm not negating that at all, Joel. I totally agree with you. I would say that the vast majority of them, are they just saying what they think they need to say to get easier time? Yes, the vast majority. But there is that small percentage that, again, the audience is probably going to hate me, but that I am really kind of in awe of their ability to look at themselves in such a critical way with such honesty and really try to rehabilitate. It's enough for me to keep wanting to do the job.
Good point. I mean, hey, we're not in the trenches like you are. We're the spectators on the outside. You deal with it on a daily basis. So, as somebody that deals with it on a daily basis, I totally commend you and also tell you, hey, I don't know what it's like to deal with the sharks. I've only seen them on TV. You're the one that sees them firsthand. So I guess you would be more equipped than anyone here in this conversation to speak to that.
I don't know. I just know that I've been let into areas and talked to about things that most people don't have access to. And
nor would I want access to be honest with you.
No, but a lot of them, they are still people and they have still experienced the same things that a lot of us have. And if there's any ability for them to come back from it and make amends in a way that's meaningful, I want to be there for it.
Good point. Well said. Very well said.
Wow. My left arm, because I'm holding the mic with my right arm, is reaching all the way to California and patting Clarissa on the back.
Oh, thank you, Eric.
That's very admirable. And it's people like you who give people faith, because, not everyone is like you, but give people faith in the system and the fact that there are
kill them all, we'll sort it out later.
But it's,
who want to help and who want to be there for people who are willing to try. And I absolutely get that. And in fact, I'm very encouraged by what you said, that in a sense, being executed is too easy. Believe me, I'm not sympathetic to these people. The fact that I am opposed to the death penalty has nothing to do with my regard for them. Yeah. It has to do with it's
the grand scheme of things.
I really admit it. It's idealism. And it's one of the things that I have chosen to kind of dig my heels in and be idealistic about. And there's even an international aspect. We're becoming one of the few, quote unquote, first world nations that still has the death penalty.
Very true. We got to run, though. We got to go Fox News. Clarissa, thank you so much for coming on the show. And we come back, we talk flying saucers, all that kind of fun stuff. Are aliens with us? Are they around? Are you going to see? And better yet, are we all going to get probed? Don't go anywhere. Be right back right after this.
Fox News Radio, I'm Kathleen Maloney. President-elect Donald Trump visited the Carrier plant in Indiana after brokering a deal to keep the local plant open instead of moving operations and about 1,000 jobs to Mexico. Mr. Trump saying it's a win for America, the workers, and the company.
I want you to tell me how many air conditioning units you sold in the last 6 months from today, because I want to say I think it's going to be a number that even will surprise your folks because of the tremendous goodwill that you've created.
The president-elect also renewing his promise to build a wall on the U.S.-Mexican border.
We're going to build a wall. People are saying, do you think Trump's going to build a wall? Trust me, we're going to build a wall. And by the way, people are going to come through that wall. We're going to have doors in that wall. But they're going to come through legally.
Mr. Trump is now in Cincinnati, the next stop on his victory tour to states that helped him win the White House. The Trump campaign has filed an objection to the Green Party candidate Jill Stein's request for a hand count of Michigan's presidential election votes. It'll delay the recount, which was supposed to start tomorrow. Search and rescue operations continue in Tennessee as wildfires are under control.
We've learned there are now more deaths being blamed on the fires.
We have increased from 7 to 10.
But Sevier County Mayor Larry Waters says the news is not all bad. They continue to work leads on the whereabouts of missing people.
A significant number of those leads, we found people where they are, and we hope that trend continues.
Hundreds of structures in and around Gatlinburg, Tennessee have been either damaged or destroyed. Waters says they'll be opening access for a limited time to areas tomorrow for owners to check their properties.
Fox's Gernal Scott, the man who made Starbucks a global coffee brand, is stepping down as CEO. Howard Schultz joined the chain more than 30 years ago. Fox News Radio, fair and balanced.
Wildfires burn millions of acres each year. And each year, wildland firefighters like Fire Chief James Hall battle to contain them. But they can't do it alone.
A single ember that escapes from a wildfire can travel more than a mile. It can ignite and destroy your home, your community, or more. That single ember can be just as dangerous as the wildfire itself. But you can do something firefighters can't. You can act now to prepare your home and your community for wildfire. You can reduce the risk. Do your part. Go to fireadapted.org.
Get fire adapted. Learn what you can do now to reduce wildfire damage later at fireadapted.org. A public service message brought to you by the U.S. Forest Service and the Ad Council. Learn more at fireadapted.org.
Oil pipeline protesters in North Dakota are getting more support.
Veterans are camped out, ready to protest this weekend with the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe and protesters who've been there for months. Matt Howard, co-director of Iraq Veterans Against the War, says he got frustrated seeing military vehicles being used by police during confrontations with protesters and wants to support protest efforts to protect the nearby river from a pipeline.
There's a real interest in being 100% nonviolent and are not interested in having both contractors hired by the Dakota Access Pipeline nor the sheriffs and National Guard intimidate folks here.
The Army Corps has said protesters have to move off the land where they've set up campsites by Sunday, but law enforcement has said they won't forcibly remove people. Jessica Rosenthal, Fox News.
Hundreds of police from across the nation turned out for the funeral of Wayne State University officer Colin Rose. He was fatally shot last month trying to make an arrest near the Detroit campus. The Michigan State Police Chief described Rose as an officer who always always went the extra mile. One of the world's most famous astronauts is under medical treatment.
Iconic U.S. astronaut Buzz Aldrin is now in a hospital in Christchurch, New Zealand, following an emergency transport out of the South Pole, where the 86-year-old had been on a luxury tour. Aldrin, the second man to walk on the moon on the Apollo 11 mission, fell ill during his visit to the U.S. research station in the South Pole and was evacuated first to a larger facility with a medical center on the Antarctic coast. Details of Aldrin's condition are not being made public, but he was earlier reported to be stable. Eben Brown, Fox News.
A renewed call for seatbelts on school buses after the crash in Tennessee that killed 6 students. The head of the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration says school buses are the safest way to get children from place to place, but seatbelts would make them even safer. I'm Kathleen Maloney, Fox News Radio.
Welcome back to After Hours AM, everybody. I'm your host, Joel Sturgis, right along with me,
Eric Olsen.
Hey, Eric, man, I am pumped because we have some really, really cool guests on tap next.
We have UFO royalty, my friends. Renowned UFO experts Stanton Friedman and Kathleen Marden present the case that there is significant evidence the U.S. government has covered up an alien presence on Earth through misinformation, distortion, obfuscation. No, not the dreaded obfuscation, and ridicule. Some prominent politically connected scientists have engaged in the cover-up as well. And a few professional writers have helped to successfully label any scientists who have been persuaded by the evidence and brave enough to take a stand as unscientific charlatans, fanatics, and kooks. Fact, Fiction, and Flying Saucers examines the wealth of archival documents that clearly demonstrate this cooperative disinformation effort and refute the false claims made by these professional scoffers. I hate professional scoffers.
So do I.
Friedman and Marden set the record straight by examining politically motivated misinformation and presenting the compelling evidence that separates fact from fiction. Welcome to the program, Stan and Kathleen.
Good evening.
Hello.
Hey,
great
guys.
to be with you.
Yeah, great to talk to you guys. And like I said before, I've had the opportunity to talk to Stanton quite a bit over the years, but I've never had the opportunity to talk to you, Kathleen, so I'm really excited. But the book is great. You know what? Like Eric was saying off air, it's really compelling stuff. And why, I guess, right off the top is what brought you guys to want to write a book like this? Like, you know, so I found it to be refreshingly in your face. I like that. I like the way that you guys are not holding any you're not no holds barred here. You guys are saying it the way it is.
No punches pulled.
No punches. I like
That's
that.
right.
I like that. I like the way
That
you guys
is
came
true.
across. What made you guys come together and write such a great book?
Well, for
We'd
me,
already written two.
Well,
yes,
true.
we'd written 2 together. We knew we could work well together, but we were both fed up with the baloney that has been shoveled out to the American public and to the UFO community about UFOs and particularly the most compelling UFO cases. And we had found evidence of the cover-up in the archival collections that we had visited, especially at the American Philosophical Society, where Philip J. Klass's archival files are, along with Dr. Donald Menzel and Edward Condon. There was a wealth of information there, plus Stan had been collecting information for, must have been probably at least 30 years from archives, and I'm going to let him continue with that.
Well, yeah, I'm an archive man. I'm an evidence man. Nuclear physicists are like that. You know, have facts in hand before putting mouth in gear.
Sure.
And I found that I enjoyed being at archives, but you got to get firsthand information. So the presidential libraries are good sources. The National Archives. I've been at 20 archives, not the same amount of time at each, but the point is that there are an awful lot of people who do their research by proclamation rather than by investigation.
Yeah.
And we don't believe that that's right. So we try to pin things down, get the proof, not just, well, that sounds like a good idea kind of thing. And, you know, there are many examples of that. One that comes to mind is the background of Dr. Donald Howard Menzel, a Harvard University professor of astronomy and the biggest debunker of the 1960s. And much to everybody's surprise, including mine, I discovered by going to the Harvard archives, I had to get permission from 3 different people there to look at his papers, and was totally gobsmacked, as the English would say, by the fact that there's a letter from Menzel to John F. Kennedy, you know, the president who had just been elected, and in it he tells him there's an area where I may be able to help you, particularly, and that is with regard to the National Security Agency, and I've had a longer continuous association with them 30 years of anybody. That came as an enormous surprise. Who knew we had anything to do with intelligence work? And the NSA is at the top of the heap. I mean, I know it means no such agency and never says anything and all that sort of stuff. But in reality, you know, if you want to know their connection with UFOs, well, an easy way to find out, several years ago, it's hard to do now, is they finally released 156 pages of top secret Umbra UFO stuff with a little kicker. You could only read one sentence per page. Everything else was whited out. Well, they released them as is required. You know,
there needs to be a word. From redacted.
Great.
Redacted does not count.
Well, that's right.
That's typical government.
The CIA also withheld a number of pages, and they black out their stuff. But the NSA came as quite a shock.
Well, they bought stock in whiteout, so you know.
Yeah. Well, whiteout's cheap, maybe.
Well, maybe
cheaper than black.
But Stan, you know, we've talked about that before, and the government is not necessarily the most forthcoming. I mean, at all. Do you guys?
How could you say
that?
I
know, but one thing I've noticed, and I think it was a conversation you and I were having about, and Kathleen, of course, my pure pleasure to be talking to you, by the way, that Project Blue Book was kind of more of a pacifier than it was an actual, you know, pacify the American people more than it really was a functional study, wasn't it? It was just more of a smoke and mirror.
It depends upon the time frame that we're talking about. During the time that Captain Edward Ruppelt was the head of Project Blue Book, at the beginning of Project Blue Book, it seemed that the Air Force was very seriously looking into the UFO problem to attempt to determine what these flying discs were.
Yeah.
And for example, they'd investigated 1,593 cases by 1952 of the 4,400 UFO reports that they had received. And of all of those cases, they attempted to classify them as balloons, aircraft, astronomical bodies, hoaxes, insufficient data, or other. And still, they ended up with nearly 27% as unknowns. They did not fit into any category. And they didn't cover that up. It was later, after actually the Robertson panel met in 1953. The CIA-funded Robertson panel and decided that we should have a cover-up, that the Project Blue Book seemed to change, and the rules changed at that time as well. The U.S. Air Force in 1953 put in a new rule, which was Air Force Regulation 200-2. And in that, it stated that Project Blue Book will inform the news media on UFOs only when they had been positively identified as familiar objects. And they said the names of the principals, intercept and investigation procedures, and classified radar data could not be revealed. All unsolved cases were classified. So that was really the time when the Air Force came in with their cover-up and started, which was a very long trail after that of cover-up after cover-up and disinformation. Yeah. But in the beginning, they seemed to be very curious about it.
Well, disinformation, it just seems to be the hallmark of the government. Look that way while we do this, and things like that. And, and UFOs, they just seem resistant to even bring up the topic of UFO, even though it's 2016. They still will not even take it seriously.
Something that proves that is that we found a memo 10 years after it was written by General Carol Bolender, an Air Force general, who had been an engineer on the Lunar Excursion Module program. It had nothing to do with Project Blue Book. But in 1969, after the Condon people had recommended that Project Blue Book be closed because it wasn't contributing anything to science or intelligence, that's what Condon recommended. So General Bolender was asked, give us a position paper. What should we do about this? We didn't know about this until 10 years later, and it was his memo in 1969 that caused the closing of Project Blue Book. And he said in that memo a shocking couple of statements. One was, reports of UFOs which could affect national security are made in accordance with JNAP, Joint Army Navy Air Force Publication 146, or Air Force Manual 55-11, and are not part of the Blue Book system. That's an astonishing statement.
Yeah,
and he went on. Another 2 paragraphs later, he said, if we close Project Blue Book, the public won't have a place to report UFO sightings. However, as previously noted, reports which could affect national security will continue to be investigated using the procedures designed for that purpose. Now, the Air Force has never said that, and we found this because a young man named Bob Todd had gotten hundreds of Freedom of Information Act requests and got this memo. We didn't see it for 10 years after that. But I called General Bolender. I was so shocked by that statement. And I talked to him, told him I'd had a security clearance for 14 years. I was a nuclear physicist. I understood how security worked. And he said, it sounded to me like you're saying that there were 2 separate communication channels for UFO reports. Those that could affect national security, like one that I'd heard 2 weeks before this, in which a witness described a saucer going down the runway at a SAC base where nuclear weapons were stored. That's national security, no matter how you slice it. And the other procedure would be if my wife and I see a UFO while we're driving down the road. Big deal. People see UFOs all the time. So I said, it sounds to me like you're saying that there are 2 separate communication channels. And he said, yes.
Yeah,
well,
one for John Q. Public and one for the government.
Well, the big question is, so, okay, if the sightings that could affect national security didn't go to Project Blue Book, to whom did they go?
Yeah, where
and
did
I have
they
an
go?
Answer.
Yes, Stan, tell me. I've always wondered, where did those darn things ever end up?
Whip it on us.
The Majestic 12 group, what will I say? It's very contentious about Majestic 12. I've written a whole book, Top Secret Magic, MAJIC, about it. But it would be natural, think about something here. The best data that you really want to do something about from a government viewpoint is data from crash saucers. You'd like to see what they're made out of and how do they work and, stuff like that. And you'd also like to look at the instrument data when pilots are chasing UFOs, not just radar, but electromagnetic emissions and all kinds of things. And you need only one group to handle that. You don't have separate Army, Navy, Air Force, et cetera. You don't want that. You want one highly classified group that is very secret and that nobody knows about. And I certainly didn't know anything about MJ-12 until I read this memo many years later. So that answers a question. Somebody has been getting the good stuff. I mean, look, having worked under security for 14 years, I cannot possibly believe that they didn't give a darn about what these things were, where they were coming from, what their goal was, and how they worked, stuff like that. These are questions of considerable importance. And we certainly don't want to tell the Russians what we learned.
Oh, no.
And if they've learned anything, they're not going to tell us what they've learned.
Yeah.
So we've got a place here that answers that basic question. So where'd the good stuff go? And I think MJ-12 fits. Now, there are a bunch of phony MJ-12 documents. I'm not saying all the documents are legit.
They didn't use misinformation.
There are 4 legitimate ones.
They didn't use misinformation to cover up their misinformation, did they?
Well, that's a good way to put it.
Yes.
Yeah, I think to some extent they did. Look, keeping secrets is a fine art.
Yeah.
And remember that in a case like this, you're keeping secrets from your own people as well as from the enemy. You can't tell your friends without telling your enemies. That's the way security works. Believe me, it does. And so you have to be very careful, and you have to have people with very high-level security clearances who are going after the good stuff. I mean, obviously, a key question: how do the darn things work? We would like to be able to build something that flies like that, wouldn't we?
We'd love
like a
to.
Wonderful weapons delivery and defense system, wouldn't it?
It'd be great, especially
well,
with a
I
cloaking
would,
device.
for my neighborhood.
That's right, with a cloaking device.
What we're kind of we came into this, and this is fascinating stuff. And let's remind people that we are speaking with Stanton Friedman and Kathleen Marden, who have a brand new book. I believe they're third together, and this one is blowing the doors off. It's Fact, Fiction, and Flying Saucers, and we just want to remind everyone out there, you got to pick this thing up. All right, so we sort of entered through that center door. I think one of the things, especially for people who aren't quite as well versed as others, people who are open-minded about UFOs but haven't made up their mind yet, if we could go back to the case, if we could go back to Roswell, and I would just really like to hear, I've heard so many different takes on it, and there's the government take, there's various government takes, and so many times that it's been redone and redone and redone and redone. I would love to hear what you, among the world's most renowned ufologists, I'd love to hear your take on what actually happened and what is the reality of Roswell. And then, of course, also, we'd absolutely, before we're done in 48 minutes, really love to hear your take on the Barney and Betty Hill incident.
Well, it's pretty straightforward. I first heard about this in the 70s, and I heard about a woman in Albuquerque who had a sighting herself and was at a radio station where they got a call from their Roswell affiliate saying that wreckage was going to be shipped to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base and wanting to put it out on the wire, on the news wire. They didn't have a contact connection with the news wire. So the woman that they were dictating to, who was not an investigator, but basically a secretary, was taking the dictation and suddenly, and putting it on the wire, I'll say a bell goes out, maybe a light goes on, I'm not sure which at the moment. Anyway, it says, then a message comes over, do not continue this transmission. Now, for those who wonder, remember, New Mexico was where the first atom bomb was tested, where 2 of the 3 nuclear weapons labs were, where they were launching all the rockets at White Sands. We're not talking about a casual place where they were looking at interesting airplanes. This is highest national security. Atomic bombs are something pretty special at that time. So Roswell, what happened was, as far as we can tell, A rancher came across some wreckage on the ground after hearing a loud explosion the night before. He told his buddies in the little town of Corona about it. They said that there had been articles in the newspaper saying if you got wreckage of a flying saucer, there's a reward for it. He didn't have a radio, didn't have electricity for that matter. And they said you should go to the sheriff's office in Roswell. So he went. And they sent him over to the base, the Roswell Army Airfield, later Walker Air Force Base. And they talked to Major Jesse Marcel, who was the intelligence officer for the only atomic bombing group in the entire world. This isn't a bunch of dinks with nothing better to do than make up stories, you understand. So Jesse Marcel, I found him by accident. I was lucky. In other words, he didn't come running to me. I was at a television station in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, promoting my lecture that night at Louisiana State University. And I had talked to 2 reporters, and I was supposed to talk to a third one, and she was nowhere to be found. No cell phones back then, you know. And so the station manager's schmoozing with me. He's looking at his watch. He knows I have other things to do. And out of the blue, he said, the guy you ought to talk to is Jesse Marcel. And brilliant investigator that I am, I said, who's he? He handled wreckage of one of those saucers you're interested in when he was in the military. What? Yeah, it was totally a shock because he wasn't joking. He was being quite serious. And you ought to talk to him. He's a great guy. What do you know about him? Well, we're old ham radio buddies. He lives over in Houma. Now, I didn't know where Houma, Louisiana was. I've been there since to see Jesse. But I called him the next morning from the airport because things had gone so well the night before at Louisiana State. And he told me a story. And people said, why did he talk to you? I found out later his picture, his name were in newspapers all over the world. I didn't know at the time, but I found it later. And so talking to Jesse, I got some other names. I shared them with Bill Moore. In the next year plus, we found 62 people connected with the case. And another year or so, we found 30 more. So we started really pursuing things.
Yeah.
And wrote a book, Crash at Corona. That's the name of the little town. It didn't actually happen near Roswell, but...
That's the next biggest town, Roswell.
No, it was smaller than that. But the point is that we had a chance to talk to all kinds of people, to visit the files. Now, it turned out a lot of the files had, would you believe, been destroyed.
Oh, geez, no, Stan, never.
Yeah, well, the senator from Mr. Schiff from New Mexico had made a big effort with the General Accounting Office to dig out the files, and well, we don't have those files anymore. I wonder why.
Yeah,
anyway,
it's funny how those files just go disappearing. They grow legs, they run away, right, Kathleen? They just, I'm sure you faced your own roadblock, Kathleen, here and there, those files that run away.
Yes, she has.
Yes.
And it's one of those things where it's the high quality of the people here. Just as with the Betty and Barney Hill case, one of the most important aspects of that story is that the psychiatrist who did the hypnosis work on Betty and Barney was the outstanding expert in the world, if you will. Benjamin Simon was his name, but in, digging into cases where the people don't have their memory anymore of it. In other words, hypnotizing military guys.
Sure.
He ran a hospital with 3,200 beds for military guys. This is at the time of the Second World War, where your buddy's head gets blown off next to you. It has an impact on you, and you kind of get back to fighting the war. So Dr. Simon was a world-class expert on that. So we're very lucky that he was the one who was involved. They didn't know anything about flying saucers.
Well, Stan, I hate to cut you off, but we got a break. We have to hit a hard break. We come back, boy, we're going to talk more about UFOs. Stan and Kathleen aren't going anywhere. You're going to want to hear the rest of this when we come back right after this.
Way down south, the sunshine and the girls come out in a Cadillac Coupe de Ville, sipping on strawberry.
Hi, Tom Bodette. If you can hear me, then you have an internet connection, which means you can do cool things online, like listen to streaming radio, obviously, or watch a video of a monkey washing a cat. Let your freak flag fly. Or you can book a room at a great price at Motel6.com. Isn't the internet wonderful? Everything you want right at your fingertips, and whoa, did not need to see that. I'm Tom Bodette for Motel 6, and we'll leave the light on for you.
Anavar Media LCC is a dedicated team of professionals committed to helping business development scale and protect their websites, mobile applications, enterprise software solutions in the Northeast Ohio area. Locally owned since 2012, our client-centered values truly sets Anavar apart. Contact us today to learn how you can get 25% off your first project. Call them at 234-380-4852. Again, that's 234-380-4852, or visit them at www.anavar.com. Again, that's www.anavar.com.
Ranger Station, Ranger speaking.
Yeah, hi. I'd like to report a bear sighting.
Location.
My backyard.
Oh, your backyard. Try telling a bear that.
I did, and this bear talked back.
Talking bear, that's rich.
No, wait, it was Smokey Bear.
Smokey? Why didn't you say so?
I did say so.
Continue.
I was burning yard waste.
No, boy.
He told me to burn legally and responsibly, and to remember that if it's too hot to touch, it's too hot to leave.
And as always, he's right. You know, 9 out of 10 wildfires are caused by humans. That means 9 out of 10 wildfires can be prevented.
Yeah, I know that now.
Thanks to me.
Actually, thanks to Smokey.
As usual, the talking bear gets all the credit. Get your Smokey on. Always burn responsibly and contact your local fire department for open burning regulations. Because 9 out of 10 wildfires can be prevented. Brought to you by Smokey Bear, the U.S. Forest Service, your state forester, and the Ad Council. Learn more at smokeybear.com. Only you can prevent wildfires.
Do you have a question for our guest tonight? Don't feel like calling the show? Not a problem. Email those questions to afterhoursam@gmail.com. Again, that's afterhoursam@gmail.com.
It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
Welcome back to After Hours AM, everybody. I'm your host, Joel Sturgis, right along with me,
Eric Olsen.
And we are talking to Stanton T, Friedman and Kathleen Marden tonight. Oh, Marden, rather.
Marden.
Sorry, I can't even talk right now because I was getting flustered. I'm a little angry. I'm not angry at anyone here. I'm just angry at the climate of our government not being honest with us. And every time I talk to Stan and I hear about how, the weaves and the dodges and this. Why can't they just be honest with us? What's so hard about that?
National security.
I know, but, whatever happened to honesty in government?
Well, we need to hear the rest of the Roswell tale.
I know.
I want to hear what happened.
Well, there was more to the Roswell tale in the sense that at the same time as Roswell, there was a crash over in the plains of San Augustine, near the Very Large Array Radio Telescope. And that one, it may have been a mid-air collision anyway. It happened about the same time. And we found witnesses. One of the things that I've been very lucky about is that I have given over 700 lectures in all 50 states, 10 provinces, and 19 other countries. Just got back from Bulgaria. Everybody's interested in UFOs in Bulgaria.
Wow.
Anyway.
Oh, you're a guy that gets around.
Yeah, and so I know that people are interested. I know that they don't know too much about the subject other than it sounds exciting kind of thing. And so one of the things that's happened in the last few years has been the Kepler space satellite, which is finding planets all over the place out there.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't too many years ago that there were plenty of people who would have said, hey, there ain't nobody else out there. We would know if there was another solar system, wouldn't we? Well, no, not back then. Kepler seems to have found about 1 to 1.6 planets per star. That may not sound like much until you realize that within 100 light years of here, 100, which is just down the street,
yeah,
there are 10,000 stars. That means
It's
more
amazing.
than 10,000 planets. So we don't need to talk about other galaxies or, a planet here or there. There was a time when the SETI people were saying that there might be, 10,000 planets in the galaxy. Now a better number would be 10 billion.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm not saying they all have life.
Mm-hmm.
But, maybe only 10%.
Well, only 10%. I mean, that's
Well,
still...
even 1%. Even
yeah.
0.1%. Even
That's right.
0.0001%.
Well,
just math.
yeah, there are
You know?
there are plenty of things in the world that we look at which are a very small percentage of the population. Uranium, only 0.7% of uranium atoms are U-235. That's the one we want because it sustains a nuclear chain reaction and so forth. Now, that doesn't sound like much, but we went after it during World War II. We built a facility that was 1 mile long to separate isotopes by pumping uranium hexafluoride gas through tiny little holes on big sheets of nickel. Mile-long facility. You pump it in one end, take it out the other end. It's slightly enriched because U-235 goes faster than U-238.
Mm-hmm.
It's lighter. And you keep doing this, and eventually you get maybe 80% enrichment or 90, which is kind of neat. Well, that whole project was highly classified, and it is interesting that during most of the time that it was in operation, it was using 5% of all the electricity produced in the United States.
Wow, my Lord!
Well, 5% may not sound... Well, it is a lot because this is a time we're building, destroyers and aircraft carriers and tanks and planes and guns and all this kind of stuff. We needed all the electricity we could produce. And so that 5% was being used for this. And nobody knew about it, remember?
So it was really important if you're the last guy done for the day to turn the lights off.
Well, yeah. What can I say? This isn't the only big secret. Look, Lockheed spent $10 billion developing a stealth airplane in secret.
Yeah.
And there are plenty of other things like that. But for people who think governments can't keep secrets, I'm sorry, you're wrong. You don't keep them by telling everybody, you understand.
That is true.
The need to know is crucial. People think, well, he's got a clearance, he finds out everything. Not so at all. And I get other people telling me, oh, those guys on Majestic 12 that I mentioned before, surely they would have told their wives what they were doing. Absolutely not.
No.
I never told my wife anything classified.
No.
It'd be ridiculous. I'd be breaking the law, setting myself up for difficulties,
Sure. Well,
and her.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. And so in the real world, secrets can be kept. Well, another example, our first spy satellite was the Corona spy satellite. We knew that the U-2 wouldn't last forever because the Russians were getting better at getting higher and being able to knock it down. So we started work in the 50s on a spy satellite as opposed to an airplane. And we had 12 failures, launches that didn't work, until the 13th one worked and got us more data about Soviet military construction than all the U-2 flights that had preceded it. we didn't announce that the Corona satellite was around.
Yeah.
I mean, the Russians know it was going over.
They didn't
But
call the Kremlin and say, "We see you."
Well, they didn't know. No, the public didn't know until more than 30 years later.
Wow.
That it was very important in preserving the peace.
Yeah.
So secrets can be kept. They are being kept, and I say that as somebody who had a clearance, but I certainly learned pretty quickly that a clearance isn't enough. You have to have a need to know. I was working on radiation shielding for nuclear rockets at Westinghouse, and I was reading in classified abstracts about work being done by the nuclear navy, but I couldn't get it. I didn't have a need to know. I had the right clearance.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But, that's the way the game is played.
Yeah, well, exactly. I suppose it's like a layer of an onion, excuse the analogy, that, they don't let everybody know everything. You will know a little bit, and another guy knows a little bit about the next layer, and so on and so forth. If they had one guy that knew everything, that would be that'd be a recipe for disaster.
Yes. And nobody knows everything, and nobody has access to everything. Even the president doesn't have a need to know for everything. Remember that the president meets with the press pretty often.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want him to know stuff that might come out inadvertently, that somebody listening would say, uh-huh.
Yeah. Well, I would imagine they have operatives and people of foreign countries that comb over every speech from the president, looking for that mess up. Looking for that little tell. You know.
Wouldn't you?
Oh, absolutely, I would. Heck yeah.
In reverse.
Heck yeah, man.
All right. It's amazing stuff. And like we were saying, I think off air, an hour, oh my goodness, we could talk for 5 and maybe scratch the surface. But I would love to hear from the world's most authority and the niece of Betty Hill, Kathleen Marden, about the very, very famous and influential Barney and Betty Hill abduction case.
Well, Stanton mentioned how important Dr. Benjamin Simon was in being the psychiatrist who hypnotized Betty and Barney. But I want to put the emphasis on Betty's and Barney's conscious, continuous recall. Mm-hmm. When you read about Betty and Barney's incident over and over again, you'll read that they saw a light in the sky and that they then had a period of missing time they couldn't account for. And then Betty had a series of dreams, and then they went to Dr. Simon, and this abduction story came out. Well, that's not exactly how the story goes. And even Dr. James McDonald, who is probably the greatest ufologist ever to have lived, a meteorological physicist who is at the top of his game, stated about the Hill case that more emphasis should be placed upon their conscious recall. Mm-hmm. And I want to tell you what that was. In the Air Force report, the report stated that when this object swooped down and was above Betty and Barney, it was as large as a dinner plate at arm's length. Now, remember, the full moon is the size of an aspirin at arm's length.
Yep.
So you can see that this was a very huge craft. It had an erratic flight path. It ascended and descended several times swiftly and flew in a jerky motion. It stopped and it hovered in the air. There was no sound evident. And when the object was above them, after it swooped down, they heard a series of short, loud buzzes, which they described as sounding like a tuning fork. They reported that they could feel these buzzing sounds in their auto. This is all part of the Air Force report. And those buzzing sounds occurred after Barney stopped the car, after the UFO had surged ahead of them and stopped in the air only 100 feet above their vehicle. Barney had gotten out and followed that craft into a field. When it moved over the field, he held the binoculars up to his eyes and he saw what he described as figures dressed in black, shiny uniforms. In the report that Betty and Barney made to NICAP, the director of NICAP was Donald Kehoe, on September 26, 1961, just after this had occurred, Betty wrote that her husband became so shocked he got back in the car in a hysterical condition after he saw many figures scurrying about as though they were making some hurried type of preparation. And one of those figures was observing Barney from the windows. From the distance they were seen, he said they were looked about the size of a pencil. Not meaning they were the size of a pencil, but it was from that distance. Yeah. So they were pretty large and seemed to be dressed in some type of shiny black uniform. Barney told Walter Webb on September 26, 1961, that he felt like he was going to be captured like, quote, a bug in a net. And Walter wrote that is when Barney knew that it was no conventional aircraft he was observing, but something alien and unearthly, containing beings of a superior type, beings that were somehow not human. That got left out of many of the reports, and especially left out by those who wanted to dispense with this story. Even the Air Force, after knowing that this craft hovered very low above the hills, that it was that large and that it was silent, said that it was probably the planet Jupiter. I can't imagine.
That's where they went to get more stupider.
Yeah.
And that is an example of the cover-up. That they said that when I was still a teenager, and I could not understand why my government would lie about this, and that is part of the reason that I wanted to write fact fiction and flying saucers, because so many of these incidents that are very compelling, have a lot of evidence, have credible witnesses, have been covered up in this manner.
Well, exactly, because, Betty and Barney, I mean, he was a postman, she was a social worker. I mean, you don't get more credible witnesses than people that have nothing to gain from telling these tales.
That's right.
Not only was Barney a postal employee, but he was also, and a lot of people don't know this, very active in the civil rights movement.
Mm-hmm.
And he was appointed by the governor of the state of New Hampshire to the U.S. Civil Rights Commission's State Advisory Committee. He worked on voters' rights in the state of New Hampshire.
And he
campaigned for Lyndon Johnson, and we were invited to Johnson's inauguration. He was pretty prominent locally in the state for the good work that he was doing for the people of the state. He even received an award from Sergeant Shriver for his work in the poverty program.
Yeah, so these were not your local yokels that would be prone to be like, yeah, we shot land in the field right over there. These are people that were both educated. They were both well-standing in their communities. They had a lot to lose by coming out like that.
And
they thought they'd lose their jobs.
Yeah.
They did not come out about that. It was disseminated to the public through, as a result of a violation of confidentiality that occurred in 1965, when a friend of Betty's, who she had confided in, spoke to a newspaper reporter for the Boston Herald Traveler.
Okay.
And that is how he started to get his information. He wrote, I know this because he wrote a letter to Betty and Barney and said that if this woman was correct in what she said about Betty and Barney, he would love to meet them because they were such nice people. And he even promised them if they would talk to him about their experience that he would never write an article about it, that he would never publicize it in any way. And still Betty and Barney refused. This man then went to the Air Force. He went to many other people who knew about the incident. And he even found 12 to 14 witnesses, he said, in upstate New Hampshire who had observed the UFO on the night that Betty and Barney observed it.
So now you have collaborating evidence or testimony of other people seeing it right along with them. And I do believe, if I'm not mistaken, Betty, she phoned, was it Peace Air Force Base? I'm trying to remember which one it was.
Yes.
And reported the UFO encounter, but she kind of withheld a lot because she didn't want to be kind of labeled as nuts.
Well,
remember, at that time, they didn't know that they had been abducted.
Okay.
They
That
didn't
come
withhold.
out until later.
She did not withhold a lot of information. It was Barney who withheld one piece of information. And that one piece of information was the figures that he observed on the craft, because he feared ridicule by the Air Force. They thought they wouldn't believe him. But then when they talked to NICAP several days later, he did describe the figures that he saw on the craft.
Now, when did it come about, the abduction, when they started? Now, we did talk about hypnosis and them working through her dreams, more Betty's dreams. What did they get out of them as far as evidence, or not evidence, or the events that unfolded? Because they were abducted. It wasn't just we saw the craft. They were actually taken aboard the craft.
They were, and they suspected this because of all the physical evidence. Betty's dress had been in fine shape when she put it on that morning, but it was torn in several locations. The zipper at the top of her dress had a 2-inch tear in the stitching and a 1-inch tear in the thick zipper fabric. The hem was torn from waist to hemline. The hem was torn down on one side. Their car that they had been driving had shiny spots that were magnetic, caused a compass needle to spin and spin. Barney's best dress shoes.
Really?
Yes, I did see them. Barney's best dress shoes were so deeply scraped he had to buy new shoes. There were many questions that they had around this, and they were seeking answers from scientists who were involved in investigating UFOs. They realized that they were missing a little bit of time, but it was a couple of months later when they actually retraced that route that they realized they had lost a full 2 hours, or maybe a little more than that. And that is why they decided to seek hypnosis. Now, under hypnosis, I need to say that Dr. Benjamin Simon hypnotized them separately, and he reinstated their amnesia after each session. There were 2 reasons for this. One reason was so that they could not discuss what they remembered and contaminate each other's information. And this is extremely important. The other reason was that each of them, at certain times during their hypnosis, were so traumatized, so distressed, that to remember all of those details at once could have been more than they could handle emotionally.
Gotcha. Because, I mean, now without looking, I remember reading the case and going over it. I want to say the first time they publicly discussed the UFO encounter was with their church, wasn't it?
Yes, and that wasn't, I don't know if you could say publicly discussed it. They discussed it with a church group.
Okay, and so,
like a Bible study group.
Yeah, and I think if my memory serves right, there was someone that gave a formal lecture on hypnosis at their church, and after the lecture, the Hills told him about what was going on as well, and that kind of got the ball rolling.
Yes,
Am I
and
correct?
that was Colonel Ben Sweat.
Okay.
Who did that. He retired from the Pentagon, and I have interviewed him as well. And he knew that he was not qualified to do hypnosis with Betty and Barney, but he was very concerned, especially about Barney's reaction to this sighting that he had and the distress he was feeling.
Yeah. I find it fascinating because you have these two absolutely credible witnesses separately being hypnotized and giving this information. I do believe, if I'm not correct, right down to some star maps were even involved. Am I correct, or is that another case I'm thinking of where they were able to?
No, that's the case.
Okay, where they were able to
That's the case where
bring
there
up.
was one star map. But I wanted to say something about that, the meeting at the church, and that is that the group who went to hear Ben Sweat talk about hypnosis were military officers. And they met privately with Betty and Barney and talked about those buzzing sounds on the trunk of the car and those spots on the trunk of the car after the meeting, after Ben Sweat's lecture. And they were very, very interested in it and wondered if it was some type of sonar that the UFO was putting out. So it seemed that they were taking it quite seriously.
Yeah. We only have about 5 minutes left, and I mean, we could talk again for hours and hours, because we're only scratching the surface. But if you want to learn more, you have to pick up a copy of the book. Of course, what we've been talking about all night. It's a great new book, Fact, Fiction, and Flying Saucers. Stanton, Friedman, and of course, Kathleen Marden. They wrote this awesome book. You got to pick it up. It really blows the lid, in my opinion. Blows the lid off a lot of things. A lot of questions
get autographed
answered.
copies from both of us, incidentally.
Heck yeah, I'd love to get one of those.
You can't get autographed copies from Amazon.
Tell us how to get a hold of the autographed copies, and where can you both be reached?
Well, Kathy, tell us.
Okay, you can buy them from my website. It's Kathleen with a K dash or hyphen Marden, MARDEN.com. You can purchase them using PayPal, and they have been autographed by both of us. And Stanton?
Yes, my address is www.stantonfriedman, that's FRIEDMAN.com. And we both personally autographed the books. I mean, they're autographed by both of us, but we put the person's name in it because we have found that people really do like getting an autograph. And, you know, it's not often you get a chance to talk to the people. We don't hide ourselves. Mm-hmm. Both our websites tell how to reach us. You know, there's a real world out there, and we think it's important that the public be made aware of that. Dr. Simon, for example, stated, and this is from a man who's done hundreds, if not thousands, of hypnosis sessions, that the emotional intensity, as Betty and Barney separately relived their experience, was every bit as intense as it was for those shell-shock war veterans that he had treated during the war. Now, coming from him, that means a great deal.
I was going to say, that's
Not
saying
just some
something.
Passerby.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's really saying something right there. And that case, to this day, I go over it. You know, Betty and Barney Hill case. And it just amazes me what they went through and what they had to go through to get their case out there, because it wasn't like so readily available. Like the internet wasn't around yet. You couldn't blog about this or put it on a website. They really were sticking their necks out. And if it weren't for them sticking their necks out, we might not know as much as we do today about how we lose time, because they were one of the first cases, as far as I know, that really dealt with the loss of time in people. You know, it was really a lot of firsts. Important. Yes, it was very, very, very important firsts as far as the study of ufology.
How did you feel, Kathleen, about the movie, the James Earl Jones movie?
The UFO incident. James Earl Jones did a wonderful job portraying Barney. The only problem with the movie is that, again, it made it appear that they had no conscious, continuous recall of a UFO, only a light in the sky, and that all of the information was revealed through hypnosis. That is false. And, that is one of the reasons that I do this, and one of the reasons that I am so interested in correcting the disinformation that has been disseminated about this case. Yep. And I know why James Earl Jones did that. He did not want to frighten the public. He told Betty that.
Well, the book, of course, is Fact, Fiction, and Flying Saucers, and we've been talking tonight with Stanton Friedman and, of course, Kathleen Marden, and they are the two authors, and, of course, you can get your own signed copy if you go directly to their websites. That being said, everyone, take care of each other, love each other, and thank you for listening to this edition of After Hours AM, and keep looking at the stars.
Thank you for listening to this edition of After Hours AM, and please remember to like us on Facebook and also follow us over on Twitter.